Mercedes had a nightmare race after their drivers collided on the opening lap, and doubly so because looking at how Russell was able to recover to P4 after being last on the opening lap, this was a huge opportunity missed by Mercedes. You've got to imagine that had that collision not happened, the drivers would have at least left the opening lap in P2 and 3, and considering McLaren were actually on a recovery drive after qualifying, and Ferrari didn't even have one of their drivers starting the Grand Prix, a double podium and potentially 33 points were lost as a result. Lewis Hamilton quickly took full responsibility before the race had even finished, saying, "I've watched the replay and it was 100% my fault, and I take full responsibility. Apologies to my team and to George." And now, really quickly on that, something that has been consistent about Lewis is that when he knows that something is fully his fault, I feel like he's always had the humility to come out and admit if he's to blame. I can point to hundreds of incidents by other drivers who, in his shoes, have not done the same thing, and although plenty of people might see this as meaningless, I think not only does it make me respect him more as a driver, but it has a positive impact that helps clear any tension between the drivers immediately after the race, and it just makes everyone focus and move on more quickly without any more tension developing. After the race, Lewis also made a point to go directly to George to apologise, and this was also massively important because it means, at least in the moment, the respect is still there between the drivers, and this situation has not yet developed into a Vettel-Webber, Hamilton-Rosberg, or even in a way a Verstappen-Ricciardo type situation where one driver starts to feel like they need to leave the team. It's weird to defend a driver and team in this kind of situation, but there is definitely a wrong way to handle this kind of thing, and there is definitely a right way to handle it to make sure that it doesn't get any worse going forward, and Lewis, George and Mercedes have done the best in a bad situation. Now, George Russell also took some responsibility and revealed some important details in an interview after the race, but I'm actually going to get back to him a little bit later. In terms of my view, I'm sure we've all seen it, so I'm not going to go frame by frame in terms of what happened, but Lewis starting on the soft tyre got a great start closing in on Max and George, and whilst those two were on a compromised inside line which meant that they had to approach the corner slower and also brake earlier, Lewis on the racing line was able to brake really late and intended to use his tyre advantage and the outside line to carry more speed into turn 1 to get into P2 and maybe even P1. Unfortunately, I think Lewis simply misjudged how much space was there for George and Max, and whether you think George should have been there alongside Max or backed out sooner, the fact is he was there. Even though he was ahead of Russell, Lewis cut across just a little bit too aggressively for how much space was there and ended up clipping Russell's front left with his right rear, spinning both of the drivers off the track, with Lewis being terminally in the gravel. In the end, it was a simple misjudgment of how much space the drivers had on the inside, but I think Lewis, knowing that he had the tyre advantage, and also knowing that those soft tyres were not going to last for long with the concern that we had about tyres in Qatar, I think he felt like he needed to make something happen there and then. Going into turn 1 when it's a 3-into-2 situation, and also when you're the driver going around the outside, most of the time the risk is almost entirely on you, and it was just unfortunate that it was his teammate who he collided with. Russell, after the crash in a post-race interview, also seemed to take some accountability for the crash, but what I found more interesting is that he also admitted that prior to the race, there was a discussion and plan about Lewis going ahead into turn 1 by using the softer tyre.
We spoke to Lewis and yeah, he took his responsibility for it as well. I just wonder, you knew with the softs were going to give you a great start, were going to give anyone on them a great start from what you saw yesterday. So yeah. Were you aware of that at the start today?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it and yeah, from our side we said, or I said this morning, I just wanted us both to be standing on that podium. My goal now is to try and get P2 for the team. And even we spoke about Lewis going ahead at turn 1, but as I said, you know, it was just a very difficult situation.
The reason why I think it's important to know that context is if there was a genuine discussion and plan before the race for Lewis to use the soft tyre to get ahead and to try to overtake Max, then I do think George also had a responsibility to back out once it was obvious that he wasn't going to pass Max. because he should have expected Lewis to then be on his outside looking to make a move. George knew exactly where Lewis was. Not only can you see him checking his left-hand mirror, but when you leave a massive space on your outside on lap 1, it shouldn't be a surprise to find any car there. Just to clarify, the incident in my opinion was absolutely Lewis's fault. I want to make that absolutely clear. But if you make a plan with your teammate, then I think leaving your car in a position where you're neither overtaking Max or making it easier for Lewis to try and go for a move into turn 1 is also not the best idea. Obviously, we as fans don't know what was said or what was planned at Mercedes, but I think it's one of those cases where you either have a plan to help the faster driver and you actually commit to it, or you just don't have a plan at all and leave it to the drivers to naturally sort it out between themselves. It feels like this incident between Lewis and George has been coming for some time now, and I think mostly it's just a consequence of having what many people consider to be the best driver lineup on the grid. Having said that, the reason why I say that it feels like it's almost been inevitable is that we have seen some strange incidents already between the two of them even prior to Qatar. Or whether it's coming together in Spain, Russell blocking Hamilton during qualifying in Spa, or even last time out in Suzuka where I think Lewis went over the line. Or when you have two teammates who are so close, it's both a positive in terms of a performance standpoint, but it can also be a negative if they start to lose respect for each other on the track. And this isn't even an issue that is just isolated to Mercedes. Excluding Red Bull, who are almost impossible to judge given what's happening with Checo, Ferrari and especially McLaren now with how quickly Oscar has developed are right up there with Mercedes, and that is why, let's not forget, only a few races ago in Monza, both of these teams almost had their drivers crash into each other as well. Sainz made some very sketchy, let's call them desperate defensive moves that almost ended in tears, and Oscar actually did crash into Lando a little bit at turn 1, but it was light enough to not have any major consequences. The fact is, what's done is done. But what do Mercedes do now going forward, because let's not forget we have got 2 more years of Hamilton and Russell being teammates. Firstly, the way the drivers and the team handled it given the situation was actually pretty good. They cleared the tension right away, so there's no need for a media circus in the next race asking if they can still be teammates, and most importantly, the respect is still there between the drivers. Once you lose respect between drivers, you lose the trust, and once you lose that, it causes rifts to form within the team, which in a team sport is never going to end well. Luckily, Mercedes are not there yet, but this was the first real crack that needs to be sorted out fast, and ultimately it's going to come down to Toto Wolff. And now, despite the fact that we heard Toto on the team radio after the crash, he hasn't actually been at the track for a few races now because he's been recovering from a knee operation. And now, I made this point on Twitter after the race, but given that the 2 biggest flashpoints on track between Lewis and George have come in the last 2 races, both of which Toto hasn't been present for, is that just a coincidence or is it actually a consequence of him not being there? Or whatever the answer, it definitely is going to be Toto's job to get both of his drivers back on the same page, and more importantly, not crashing. The problem is, tension between competitive teammates is an issue as old as time itself, and it's a problem that only gets worse as the car gets better. It's easy now because neither driver is fighting for wins, let alone a world championship, but what happens when the car does get more competitive? Since Russell came into the team, these moments of mismanagement which have led to these weird misunderstandings on track have become more and more frequent. Fundamentally, I don't think Russell or Hamilton actually have a problem racing together. I think the issue has been that both of the drivers are not on the same page with each other and racing as if they're in different teams. That falls on Toto Wolff to bring the team together and manage the drivers better. Although every single situation is different, based on current performance levels, the Mercedes situation now most resembles to me the Verstappen-Ricciardo fallout of 2018. Max and Daniel were great friends off the track, still are in fact, but in 2018 and specifically after their crash in Baku, at a time when the team wasn't fighting for championships, Daniel made it clear that he didn't like the way the team treated him after the crash, and Max didn't feel like he needed to take any responsibility. It caused a very obvious rift within the team, which Christian Horner himself later admitted had a part to play in Ricciardo deciding to leave. Now, I think at Mercedes, the bonds that hold George and especially Lewis there are much stronger, so I don't think we're anywhere near having those discussions yet. But the point is that I have never seen a teammate partnership that started to show signs of cracking with the drivers coming together, then magically get better as the car has got more competitive. To me, there is exactly zero precedent of that happening over the last 10-15 and stops putting its drivers in these situations that leads to these bizarre incidents that we've been seeing, but also to do the impossible and actually make sure that if they do start challenging for wins again in 2024, that the team can actually manage Lewis and George. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.